Good evening, everyone. This is me. You'll see my face in a second. I thought I would open with something appropriate to discuss this topic that we're going to talk about today, which is Martin Luther's very crass, very vulgar mouth, his very vulgar ideas, his extremely vulgar attacks on other people, and of course his fascination with feces. So yes, I've yeah, the jokes just kind of write themselves. So yeah, um, it's really tough for me to take this one seriously in the sense that it's so ridiculous. It should have been laughed out of the room centuries ago. But this information is only available to us now. Now the we have the sources available to us. We can read the histories. We have the technology to sort through this. So yeah, as you can see on the slide I've got here, I'll take the religion founded on doctrine inspired while taking a shit for $50, Lewis. So yeah, hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. And yeah, I doing this makes me really angry. I read this stuff. At one point, I believe this, and it upsets me to think that someone misled me, someone lied to me, someone gave me half the facts, not all the facts. So I couldn't make the correct decisions because, yeah. Anyway, so yeah, but this is likely to upset people. I know that my content probably hurts people's feelings because I get many hurt feelings reports. And CMB, welcome. Yeah, so happy Lent, everyone. Welcome, Francis. Thank you. Yeah, happy Lent to everyone. So yeah, Inri, welcome. Philip, Just Janice, Artsy Fartsy, Nerdy Woody, Roseanne Rossi. Yes, Roseanne, we're here now. So yeah, is horse around? Century since, welcome. Roxy, Harriel, great to see you all. Okay, so let's dive into this very rabbit rockfish. I'm willing to be hurt to learn the truth. Yeah, Gecko Berry. Yeah, so okay, look, a few things I want to cover before we go. Have you already seen my intro? So yeah, sadly, I wish I were kidding about this particular slide, but I'm not. That's the crazy part. That's the crazy part. But hold on, let me dive into a few things that I think will be relevant. So let's jump over here. First of all, a couple of days ago, I hit 1 million views. It's taken about, I don't know, a billion years to get there, but I now have over 1 million views on my channel. So thank you very much for supporting the channel and for the growth. So really much appreciated. Yeah, I know that what I do is so, contentious and is yeah, that doubtless going to offend people, but I think that what I do is well sourced, factual, and yeah, so necessary. This is the picture of the guy that wrote to me, Michael Morale. I've been warming up to the Catholic faith for a while now. I don't know if I actually believe that statement. I'm not sure if this is actually even true. Thanks for setting me straight by spouting nothing but hate. That's what Muslims say when you talk about Islam and you present facts about Islam, when you actually show their own sources to them. I won't say you are lying, but I will point out that ignoring the truth to mislead your audience is not any better. If anyone here of my audience, if you can show that I'm lying, then I owe you an apology. But I believe I've been factual. I believe I have provided credible evidence, reams of it, and also made what I think are reasonable conclusions. He says, every second point you make blatantly ignores the other side doing the same, if not worse. Now, that's interesting because, as I have been stating on this talk, the Protestant side has lied for centuries. And I mean have lied. Not accidentally, not ignorantly, but deliberately, knowingly, in a coordinated manner, as we will eventually see, especially when I get to the Black Legend, when we get to the Spanish Inquisition. You will realize that this was planned. But he does say, go F yourself. So, well, the fact is that I'm trying to show the other side of the story because the Protestants claim to have cleaned up the whole act of the very dirty Catholic Church. And we're seeing that maybe the Catholic Church isn't as dirty as the other side made out. And maybe the Protestant side is far, far worse. So, okay, but let's put that aside. Okay, we've seen that, and I think I can let that one go now. So I'll close that. I think we've seen it. Okay, so let's go do a couple of things here. Okay, then on this, my Gnosticism versus only Christianity. Father Maudsley played a few seconds of my clip on the divine will. The divine will, and I watched his most recent episode on it, is Gnostic. It is clearly Gnostic. It is heretical. Now, Steele MJ says here, you do a lot of great work, but to call a fully approved Catholic work Gnostic and not even Catholic is quite ignorant. Despite Father Maudsley's attacks, the writings by the servant of God, Luisa Picaretta, published by Saint Annibal de Francia, are incomplete alignment with Catholic orthodoxy, scripture, tradition, and the magisterium. That statement is false. It is a lie. Now, whether he knowingly lies, I don't know. So I would think Father Maudsley is better qualified than he is, but I'm going to use just this last example here. I went and checked on the magisterium. Luisa Picaretta's writings were considered inconsistent with the Catholic faith due to the concept of divine will that she promoted. This concept emphasized a passive state where the soul's only desire is to do what God wills without seeking personal perfection or happiness. This passive approach to love and forgiveness, detached from personal growth and purification, was contrary to the traditional Catholic understanding of virtues and spiritual development. The Catholic Church has warned against such aberrations that could lead to disillusionment and has emphasized the importance of active participation in God's plan. So yeah, and these are the references here that I have. So this Catholic is ignorant. Maybe they're not a Catholic. So do understand that I check my sources. Okay, I don't just rely on my favorite priest said, because your favorite priest is often wrong. Right? They're often misguided. So I went and checked with the magisterium itself, and there's more than one reference that I found on that topic. Right, I'm going to be utilizing Luther's works. Now this is a medieval castle toilet. So do understand that in Martin Luther's works, he will discuss the tower experience, the experience in the tower. Well, just so you know, this is the tower. This is the tower. Here's the tower. This is the tower they're referring to. When they say tower, they mean toilet. Toilet, toilet, toilet. The place where you take a dump. Okay, that is the tower that is being referred to when Martin Luther had a tower experience. He was pooping in the toilet when he had his theological inspirations. Okay, this picture here is Martin Luther in the popular image in Germany called Hercules Germanicus. So in other words, he was the German Hercules. And this is Martin Luther. Here he is hanging the Pope. The Pope has been strangled to death with a rope, and the Pope is hanging from his teeth, and Martin Luther is here decapitating other priests. You'll see here. Source, Hans Holbein the Younger, 1497. Luther as Hercules Germanicus, colored woodcut, 1519. So Martin Luther is here killing Catholic monks, killing Catholic priests. So I think by this we can understand that with this weapon, Martin Luther being Hercules, this is the evidence of Martin Luther emphasizing the religion of peace, correcting, the errors of the nasty, violent Catholic Church by bringing, holiness while murdering priests and ripping off their heads, as you can tell. So, yeah, we do have a very badly catechized generation. Okay, so just so you know what this is a common image of Martin Luther. All right, and okay, so let's dive into this topic, and let's start at the beginning. So I did mention a few times that the main source you would need to reference is this one here, called German Hercules, The Impact of Scatology on the Definition of Martin Luther as a Man, right? 1483 to 1546. So this is written by Danielle Mead Scalver, University of Maryland, University College, and this is a very highly educated woman, associated with the Society for Military History and part of Encyclopedia Britannica's publishing partner program. She was assistant professor of history at the University of Maryland. She also teaches at the University of North Dakota and Dakota College. She specializes in U.S. and European military history with a focus of social history in the late medieval and early modern period. Right? She's famous for writing this particular document. She was the coordinator, or is, at the History Capsule and Course Series at the University of Maryland. She's collegiate professor of history, and she's won a variety of academic honors and the National Historic Research and Preservation Award from the Daughters of Colonial Wars. Okay, a little bit about her, so let us continue with this document. It says 55 pages, but that's much of that is references. Is about 30 pages because it's triple spaced. There's only about 20 something pages of notes in actual fact. Why would someone paint that? Well, we're going to look at some very interesting paintings as we go, artsy fartsy. No, Martin Luther's view was not love thy neighbor, it was more kill thy neighbor. And Martin Luther, hold on, let me show you something else. So what I will be talking about in the near future is because Protestants that I've seen constantly say, well, Lloyd, Martin Luther was not the original Protestant. Actually, it was Jan Hus. Jan Hus was the first Protestant, and Jan Hus actually inspired everything, and Jan Hus actually had all the original ideas, and Jan Hus inspired Martin Luther. Well, Jan Hus did not only just inspire Martin Luther, Jan Hus also happened to inspire the creator of fascism, a man called Benito Mussolini. So Jan Hus inspired Martin Luther, who, as we know, as I've discussed, was a great inspiration to the Nazis, because the Nazis actually implemented Martin Luther's program and murdered millions of people based on Martin Luther's writings. Not in a misunderstanding or a misapplication of Martin Luther's writings. They did what Martin Luther, the good Christian, said to do, and they murdered a lot of people. So now Jan Hus also happened to inspire not just Martin Luther, but also Benito Mussolini. Benito Mussolini, the guy who created fascism in Italy and who was obviously a great fan of, actually, let's go to, actually, why did I not do this earlier? Let me do something here. Let's go to community. He actually wrote a book. Oops, not here. No, not that one. So now I need to go to page.com. Should have thought of this earlier. Jan Hus actually inspired Benito Mussolini. Benito Mussolini then wrote a book about Jan Hus, and the beginnings of the beginning of Benito Mussolini's fascism can be found in his book on Jan Hus. So Jan Hus inspired this fascist dictator, which just tells you the kind of things that he must have been teaching to people that wasn't misunderstood, but correctly understood and correctly applied. Of course, when you read more about Jan Hus, what you learn is that obviously you'll find the word socialism crops up and lots of violence, political violence, because, as you know, proto-Protestantism was the religion of peace. And of course, well, don't forget this about Martin Luther, right? He says, if grace is true, you must bear true and not a fictitious sin. So bear true sins. God does not save people who are only fictitious sinners. Be a sinner and sin boldly. Yeah, don't be a lukewarm sinner, be a bold sinner. And he says here, no sin will separate us from the Lamb, even though we commit fornication and murder 1,000 times a day. This is morally sound. This is good Christian advice, because this man is a great theologian, which surprises me why Martin Luther's writings align so well with Nazi policy. I just cannot understand that. So yeah, your thoughts on this, but let me continue here. So yeah, Jan Hus was the model for young Mussolini, the model for Martin Luther, and yeah, we'll continue on that. But what is interesting is that I was watching this. Let me just show you this here. So this was Dr. Gavin Ortland. Let me just step forward a few seconds. And he was talking about Jan Hus. Oops, let me do this again. And he says actually, right, this is Gavin Ortland discussing Jan Hus. He's a personal hero of mine. I just admire his courage. In some great respects, I find myself relating to him even more than the Protestant reformers a century later. Yeah, so maybe, yeah, well, we'll have a look into the kind of inspiration that Jan Hus can be. That's coming up. Let me close that. All right. So your thoughts on this as we are going? Yeah. So you got to sin lots, so grace is something to do. Yeah, so something to do, exactly. If you don't sin as much as possible, sin boldly, there'll be nothing for God to do, right? So, I mean, it's hard to be humble if you're perfect in every way, right? So sin a lot. So otherwise you don't want God to be bored, now do you? So, all right, so let's continue. Now, Okay, so the writings of Martin Luther are amongst the most studied in the world. So he gave the Christian God back to the common man, yet Luther also spoke with shocking cruelty and vulgarity. Martin Luther's employment of vulgarity, and specifically scatological meaning to do with poop, right, in his writings and speech has drawn criticism, embarrassment, and accusations of psychological instability. But there was power in this coarse language, for Martin Luther's combative use of scatology defined him as a virile male in 16th century Germany. So, yeah, 16th century Germany, and we're going to talk about Martin Luther's influence on the psyche of Germany. Poopaganda, yes, definitely, poopaganda. So, he was brash and full of bravado. The scatology of Martin Luther lent him the appearance of fearlessness. Scatology in many societies is associated with the locker room and the military, two bastions of virility. Among elites in Europe of Luther's day, scatology was not unusual. This was particularly true in German-speaking lands. So, what we can gain from this is that Germany was a very uncouth place. People loved talking in vile, vulgar language, loved using poop to describe things. And Martin Luther, being the good Christian, the great theologian, the one who was going to clean up the act of the nasty, brutish, dirty Catholic, evil Catholic Church, Martin Luther was going to bring change and reformation, and Martin Luther was just as foul-mouthed as everyone around him, because he was not... Martin Luther was just as foul-mouthed as everyone around him, because clearly he didn't get the memo that Christians generally are not supposed to indulge in the disgusting and sick and immoral culture of the day. But fine, that's... So, in a time of rising nationalism, now you must understand this implies also a political impetus behind leadership by example, exactly. Now the question is, Philip, did Martin Luther did he make it worse? Did he make it better? Or did he kind of cause it? Did he kind of snowball the situation? Did he kind of introduce it? These are things to think about, So a time of rising nationalism. So understand there's a political undertone constantly to everything around Luther, and in fact all of the Protestant movement, including Jan Hus. His combative and demeaning brand of scatology leveled against not only a spiritual, but also a foreign enemy in the papacy, secured for him the definition of virile German male. So in the German psyche, according to this, the fact that he spoke a lot of poop, using a lot of poop imagery, using vile, disgusting language, made him a real man. Real man. So this virility was largely the product of Luther's aggressive use of scatological language, for in demeaning his enemies, Luther diminished their virility. So yeah, in calling people words related to poop, Luther brought them low and established his status as a real man. Yes, Dr. Jonathan Gemmell. We should chat sometime. If you send me an email, I'd love to have a chat with you and get your thoughts on this topic, or just on what I do on this channel. So, in a culture where artists, writers, and theologians employed urine, feces, and flatulence as weapons to belittle their enemies. Okay, so apparently that was the flavor of the day. Now, poop logic, poopology, who knows? So the question is, we need to consider, is this true, or is this an apologetic to try to excuse what Luther is doing? Understand? You always have to ask questions about this thing. Don't accept everything that is being said to you blatantly or bluntly, right? So the simple thing is to look and check for yourself. In this battle, the sheer volume of scatology coming from the Lutheran side far outweighed that coming from the Catholic side. So in other words, there was a lot more poop-related language, vile, scatological, disgusting language coming from the Lutheran side, far more so than the Catholic side, which again just proves how dirty, vile, and disgusting the Catholic Church was. And even if Luther was worse than the Catholic Church, it is only because the Lutherans were responding to the disgusting, nasty, vile Catholic Church, which thereby justified the far worse, vile, disgusting, immoral, uncouth, coarse behavior of Luther and his fellows. So, yeah, I guess you just can't win. It is not only the volume, but this intensity and graphic nature of Lutheran scatology that caused historians to take up the study of the vulgar side of Luther's writings and sayings. Now why don't we get long, detailed analyses of these, except in this document, by Lutherans saying, Luther not only gave us great theology, he gave us some of the most interesting, creative swearing, lying, and disgusting language known to man. So Martin Luther's coarse language combined with woodcuts appearing in his writings, including a woodcut depicting the Pope and his curia being birthed from a she-devil's bowels, therefore not even human, but rather the she-devil's feces, jolt historians out of any illusions they may have developed in the study of Luther's more lofty works. In other words, he had a very disgusting side. We will get into all of that. So, attempts to explain this vary widely. Some argue that he suffered from emotional instability and from the lasting effects of alleged child abuse. As far as I can tell, he was abused as a child. He was violently abused, and he was emotionally unstable. Some find Luther's vulgarity repugnant and have used it as evidence of a lack of moral character. He had a certain lack of moral character, as we will discover. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been such a great inspiration to the Nazis. Others see eschatology as nothing more than a product of his times and national culture. Muhammad shagging a 6-year-old or 9-year-old, he was just a man of his time, and we shouldn't judge him by modern standards. Muhammad's the perfect man. His teachings are valid for all time. You understand that argument is no different to what Muslim apologists make about Muhammad. Muhammad was nothing more than a man of his time. It was quite fine. And then, of course, you say, so shagging kids and pedophilia. Muhammad was not a pedophile. But Sahih Bukhari was wrong. Okay, that's a weak hadith. Yeah, and the same applies to excuses I've seen about Martin Luther. He was just a man of his time. In other words, he was no better than the dregs that he associated with. I thought he was better than the Catholic Church, but apparently not. So yeah, do you understand? Here is a conflict. Here is a contradiction. Here is an issue with history. So, historians do not agree, but everyone's trying to make excuses, and some are better than others in terms of the way that they actually lay out the evidence. So I'm living in East Germany. The Lutheran Church is in everything. People here usually laugh off Luther's table talks, especially the vulgar ones relating to dining etiquette. Yeah, it's embarrassing, but it's a weak hadith, right? I've seen that excuse very, very often. Those are weak hadith, Lloyd. Yeah, sounds like the Islamic idea where if people didn't sin, Allah would have to create people who did. That is really interesting, Villainous. That's a really good catch. That's a really good catch, yeah. Sin boldly. That is really fascinating. Hi, Bernadette. Welcome. Sounds like Mo's followers is how they described infidel. So Luther seems like he decided in a position and just went to the extreme, ignoring any contradiction points. Exactly, Oratex. I'm not surprised that Luther was abused as a child. Yes. So let's continue. Okay, now Luther's crude language served him as a weapon against enemies, both corporeal and incorporeal, so both human and spiritual. So, premier among those arguing from a psychoanalytic viewpoint is psychoanalyst Erik H. Erikson. So he looks at the table talks. Now, thanks to you guys, I managed to buy a full set of Luther's works in English. So, in his book, Young Man Luther, he takes the approach that Luther's scatology derives from active remnants of childhood repressions. Luther is a patient dealing with neurotic suffering, right, who as a young child made mental connections between his own bowels and the fickle and dangerous bowels of the earth, which were the world of his copper mining father. Now, Luther very often has written, and I've actually seen notes on this, Luther writes, I grew up very poor, my parents were poor, which is a lie. Martin Luther lies about his childhood to gain sympathy, so that he can associate himself with the peasants. Don't forget, he allied with the peasants, he made nice with the peasants were being oppressed. Martin Luther called the rich princes oppressors of the peasants rose up in revolt, and Martin Luther abandoned and betrayed them and then sided with the princes, told the princes to kill the peasants, and apparently, according to the source we were looking at, thousands, if not 100,000 peasants were killed. And Luther said, look, go ahead and kill them because that's God's will. To do so is what God would want, kill those peasants. Go ahead and slaughter them. Right, so that tells us a little bit about Martin Luther. So Luther was spanked exacerbated his obsession with bowels, for in his view, punishment aggravates the significance of this area as a personal battlefield of parental and infantile wills. Luther's scatology indicates a manic-depressive response to corporal punishment, manic-depressive, and overzealous toilet training, manifesting itself in anal defiance towards the paternal figure of the Pope. And oh yeah, we're going to see that come out as an adult. Luther had very serious constipation and kidney stones. Luther was a very sick man. So you also have to understand that he's portrayed within the German historical narrative as a very healthy, virile, fit, strong man. Luther was sickly. Luther was a very sick, emotionally unstable man. For Luther, the hind end has a malignant dominance Luther's coarse language was a symptom of psychological struggles and corporal punishment bordering on child abuse. Numbering among those citing Luther's scatology as proof of low moral character are Hartmann Grissar and Heinrich de Niffler. Grissar quotes Luther's crude language to prove his point and acknowledges that while Luther's language was not sexual in nature and would not have disgusted people of his era to the degree it might disgust modern readers, that Luther should have cultivated this particular language so as to outstrip in it all of his literary contemporaries. In other words, Luther developed his vile, coarse, crude, disgusting, scatological language, his ability to swear and insult, to a far greater degree than any of his literary contemporaries. He was more vulgar. He was going to be, think of Muhammad and Muhammad's followers telling, why don't you go suck your mother's clitoris? Think of that kind of language. So Luther made sure that he was more disgusting, more vile than his opponents. This scarcely redounds to his credit. His readers and hearers of that day frequently expressed their disgust at Luther, and at times his language was so strong that even Catherine Bora, Luther's wife, was forced to cry halt. Luther's vulgarity betrays a lack of self-control and questionable character. So both Grissar and de Niffler take full advantage of their access to the oldest sources of Luther's works, letters, and table talks in German. That's an interesting point, Eric Montez. That's a really interesting thought there. Yeah, Luther was not well, physically, spiritually, and mentally, definitely. Oretex says, so he's projecting his daddy issues now that this sounds familiar. Yeah. So, yes, Luther was a little bit of a genocidal maniac, DMAC. We'll talk a lot about Luther's his inspiration of genocide. So, let's see. So, he's projecting his daddy issues. Luther was sick. Did I miss? There was something else that was said. Lloyd, leave all this logic and reason behind and accept Muhammad Luther religion. Yes. Your puns are fantastic today, Dr. Obvious. Someone says. Great. Okay. Erasmus. Okay, so let's see. Among those who assert that Luther's scatology was nothing more than a product of his time, you have Roland H. Bainton and E.G. Schwiebert. So they say his scatology was not as prolific as one would think. Yeah. We'll get some other notes in the future, but arguing that Luther took up the prevailing scatological elements of his exegetical theology of his day, Bainton contends that Luther wrote and spoke with less vulgarity than did his contemporaries. Yeah, but typically being a great Christian theologian, someone who created a new religion, you'd think that he would be saintly. You'd think that he'd fall into the category of St. Paul. I don't recall St. Paul talking about eating poop, for instance, So, likewise, Schwiebert argues that Luther's scatological expressions were simply the norm for his era. So, Muhammad shagging a child was just the norm for the era. We really shouldn't judge him because God wants that. It's normal. That's what it was. So, if this was normal for the era, it was normal for Christians. So, that was normal Christian behavior to use the most vile, coarse, disgusting language. Thanks, Schwiebert. Okay, so both men said remarkably little about Luther's scatology. For the most part, they dismissed it. Yeah, let's just ignore the evidence and move on swiftly, shall we? So, in his examination of 5 centuries of German folklore, letters, and song, Alan Dundes takes this concept of culture and extends it to a distinctly German aspect of Luther's world. For he notes that while Thomas More of England returned excrement for excrement in a retort to Luther, and we'll discuss that more, Thomas More felt compelled to apologize for the necessity to respond to Luther in his own filthy language. More seems to have been truly disgusted by the necessity to use such language. Alan Dundes tells us that scatology was and still is a distinct part of German culture, more so than of similar cultures. Right? He refutes the work of Erickson and asserts that Luther's scatology was quite normal. Okay, fine. Yeah, so Luther was better than everyone else. Luther was as disgusting as everyone else. That's what you want from your founders of modern religion, of a new religion. A slightly different approach is that Luther was not only a product of his culture, but, and here's the important part, a creator of it. In a larger series of works entitled Studies in European Cultural Transition, right, there's a volume on scatology. Joseph Schmidt and Mary Simon examined Martin Luther's impact on the modern German language. The reason this is important is that I've had many Protestants comment on my channel, but Martin Luther created the modern German language, you see. Martin Luther created the new Bible. In fact, there would not have been a Bible that wasn't Latin, and people were killed for not having the Bible, wanting to write the Bible. And it's because of Martin Luther that you have the Bible and the modern German language. Well, we have a highly scatological German language then, according to these historians, because of Martin Luther. Schmidt and Simon refer to Luther as a theological shit spreader. And they say further that Luther provided the scatological with a fervor, with an enthusiasm never read or heard before. And I'd say that's probably true. Martin Luther took disgusting language to a depth never seen prior, especially in the history of, shall we say, theology, Christian theology. But Martin Luther was a great man. Don't let Martin Luther's disgusting mouth and filthy mind lead you to think otherwise. So, Schmidt and Simon cite Dundes as they find German culture exceptionally free with the scatological, and argue that the Reformation era bears much responsibility for the scatological bent to modern German culture. Now, you've seen me quote other historians that make exactly the same claim. Blame Luther for how messed up, how violent, and how twisted German culture is that led us into 2 world wars. So, the fourth theory also accepts that Luther's scatology was prolific and asserts that Luther used scatology as a weapon against his enemies, which is true, and that's Bernard Loos, the historian. He finds Luther's crudeness shameful. Luther's vulgarity increased according to whether or not he was under attack, or just thought he was under attack. Without crediting Luther with the shift, okay? In other words, as in introducing scatological ideas into the German language and German culture, in Luther's lifetime, scatology moved from primarily a comic thing to a weapon of ridicule. So Martin Luther seems to have shifted scatology from something that was used as comedy to something that was used as a legitimate weapon to belittle your opponents, especially your theological opponents. Scatology was effectively used as a weapon against earthly and supernatural foes. So we'll get to that. It had the effect of exorcising fear of these enemies by diminishing their stature. So Martin Luther, as we will discover, utilized swearing and farting as a way to exorcise the devil, as a way to get rid of the devil, as a way to drive away Satan by using poop and farts and smelly poop. This was Martin Luther's way of using Luther magic to get rid of Satan. Claude Gandelman expands on this as he demonstrates that Luther's scatology provided direct inspiration to French revolutionaries when they created their scatological iconography. The French Revolution, as I have discussed at length in my French Revolution series on atheism, was a violent, genocidal, anti-Christian, specifically anti-Catholic movement. It was also anti-reason. It was infested with Freemasonry. It was infested with the occult. It was infested with paganism. It was the new paganism, the modern paganism, the resurgence of ancient pagan heresies. And it says here that Luther's scatology provided inspiration to French revolutionaries. So the man who rescued Christianity, who rescued the Bible, who brought us the Bible, assisted the French revolutionaries in creating poopological iconography that was designed to destroy the church. Clearly, these people were just misunderstanding Luther, because Luther was a great man and a great theologian. So the foundation for this approach to Luther's crude language originates in the Bakhtinian philosophy of a material bodily principle, meaning that depictions of the powerful at their most basic and vulnerable levels of consumption, defecation, copulation, and nudity degrade the powerful. So this is Bakhtin. He's a Russian philosopher, and he basically explains, he utilizes this idea, this example. So this is a way of demeaning people. It's a way of insulting people. It means you don't have ideas to actually refute people with. You actually are just going to insult them with the most basic, the most base, the most unclean thoughts, ideas, metaphors, and specifics that you possibly can. So Luther used scatology to combat the devil and the Pope. Okay, so he says here, so let me see. Now, beyond reducing enemies to objects of mockery and derision, derision Scribner says of scatology. In the popular mind, it would also have served to link the Pope and his followers with the demonic. In particular superstition, in popular superstition, the toilet was the haunt of demons and evil spirits. So Martin Luther would go into the toilet and he would argue with the devil very loudly. He would have arguments with the devil while on the toilet, and he would use his pooping and the smells and the farts to drive Satan away. Now, there's another guy called, he has a religion from Arabia. Good grief. He also believed that Satan lived in the toilet. And he also recommended praying to get rid of, saying a particular prayer and getting to get rid of Satan in the toilet. Muhammad, yes. And Martin Luther, instead of using prayer, used his farts to get rid of Satan, because, as you know, when you need to do an exorcism, as Martin Luther was doing, you don't use prayer, you don't invoke the name of Jesus, you don't use the Bible, you use pooping and farting, because that's the best way to get rid of Satan. Because Satan, as you know, Satan has no attachment to filth. So, moving on. Okay, so now, while Obermann praises Scribner's work, he does not accept that Luther's vulgarity was designed primarily for an ignorant or unlettered audience that couldn't read. For Luther spoke freely with scatological language to his fellow clerics and academic elites. So Luther's friends and academic elites that he surrounded himself with were just as foul-mouthed as he was. So this was the club of who can swear the best. Farting and Satan is involved with Islam too. Thunderous, welcome, good to see you. Thunderous, sorry, we should have done something yesterday, but let's do something this weekend, all right? 7:30 my time, 6:30 your time in London next weekend. Let's do that talk we spoke about. Okay. So now you've got academics and elites that wanted to see who could swear the best, like sailors. Hi Lloyd, if you focus on his extremities, do you think he had obsession or possession himself? He was certainly obsessed with his body. There's other material I'll come to. I mean, I don't want to go into depth and read the whole book to you. I mean, in this case, I'm going to read this paper to you because it's reasonably short. I might have to break it into two parts, but I want to introduce people to evidence about Luther that one exists, two is not always available to us outside of academia. So academics have access to material we don't have access to, but they discuss this material that they have seen and they write about it. So this tells us there's more information about Luther that is only now coming out in the last few years that changes the picture of Luther. And yes, he was very much obsessed with his body. He was very much obsessed with bodily functions. He was obsessed with the physical. He was immersed in the physical. So yes, he had 1 foot in hell and 1 foot in heaven. I don't know, whatever. He was, I mean, he spoke about the theological, but he was definitely buried in the dirt, shall we say, 1 foot in the toilet. Okay, so he says Luther's scatology was not solely or even primarily for the sake of simple folk. Luther's coarse language was not only a valid weapon, it was an acceptable and powerful way to speak in academic circles. In describing one of Luther's filthiest sermons, Obermann paraphrases Luther thusly: "Get lost, Satan, eat your own shit." So in describing Luther's sermon, Luther apparently said something of this sort in a sermon: "Get lost, Satan, eat your own shit." I haven't heard priests say that a lot during sermons myself. Maybe at Luther's church it was a little different, but I'm kind of thinking that might not be, shall we say, orthodox. Immediately after the sermon, Luther was elected as the right hand of Staupitz and placed in charge of 11 monastic houses and the only 2 studia in Erfurt and Wittenberg, the very foundation of the order. This proved for Obermann that Luther's scatology was not mere propaganda for commoners, so that he could have a connection with the common, coarse, vulgar peasants, but for his fellow monastic academics who received it approvingly. So it looks like the theologians around Luther were just as foul-mouthed and foul-minded as him. So Obermann accepts Luther's filthy language without blushing. And he tries, so Luther's ravings, and he says here ravings, this historian goes on to say, Luther's ravings. Now, I know there are other people that also know. Okay, so for instance, other people that are known to have ravings would be this guy, right? This guy was known to have ravings as well, Muammar Gaddafi, right? But Martin Luther, the word ravings is now, I mean, is the word ravings associated with St. Paul, right? Is it associated with the early church fathers? But Luther's ravings is associated with a madman. Should not be suppressed out of embarrassed respect, and certainly not because they might not be considered proper today, because that was normal Christianity back in the day. You know, throw poop around, fart all the time, think that farts chase away the devil. That was normal Christianity back then. We've forgotten true Christianity because we don't do that today. And the early church fathers had Christianity all wrong because they weren't into poop. Luther figured it out. Luther figured out the recipe. I take it you don't like Luther, Lloyd, but it was a long time ago. Raymond, I am not going to say the thought that actually jumped into my head when I read that. So dealing so gingerly with him means not taking him at his word. So this historian is telling us that don't lie about Luther. Don't try to pretend he didn't speak this way. Don't try to pretend he wasn't the disgusting, foul-mouthed pig that he was. He says, no, don't try to, you see, what I find very commonly, and I find this across the board with all Protestant theologians who try to talk about Luther, they reinterpret what he said. They don't, you see, because Luther didn't, it's not what Luther said, it's what they say Luther meant. Because when Luther said, eat shit, what Luther meant was, not the actual content of the words, because you're just an uneducated ignoramus who's probably influenced by the Pope, you papist, foolish Catholic influenced, fool you. Yeah, they Luther-splain. Yeah, this is Luther-splain. You see, what Luther meant was, dear Satan, you are not welcome here. Please fie thee hither. See, that's what Luther really meant. Luther really was a gentle, beautiful, warm soul. So they try to reinterpret not what Luther said. It's what he meant that's important. It's what he meant. So anyway, the scatological writings and speech of Martin Luther, together with woodcuts commissioned to appear in his work, have drawn attention from Luther's detractors and admirers alike. Researchers have approached Luther's vulgarity as evidence of a troubled psyche. Let me just make these larger. See if I can make this a bit larger and zoom in so you guys can see this a little better. I'm going to go to 270%. Hopefully you can see this text better. Okay, so they also see it as evidence of a lack of moral fiber, as nothing more than a manifestation of his contemporary culture. Because, as you know, we shouldn't judge Muhammad because Muhammad shagging a child was, as Raymond said, a long time ago. And we shouldn't dislike Muhammad for shagging a child. I mean, Muhammad is the equivalent of Jesus, in fact, greater than Jesus. So he's only the founder of the religion, right? So we shouldn't judge the founder of the religion for shagging a kid because that was a long time ago. Don't apply modern standards to old people who established perfect behavior that is valid for all time, for all Muslims. Because that would make no sense at all. Please make the stupid stop. So anyway, and finally, he used eschatology as a weapon in the Reformation fight and in Luther's personal war with the devil, because Luther had a personal fight with the devil on a regular, ongoing basis. So these different views are still held by modern students of Luther. They're still fighting about all of this nonsense. So more and more historians are taking the view that Luther's eschatology, while excessive even in his own era, and certainly repugnant to any modern sense of decorum, aided him as a weapon. So Luther used filth as a weapon because the Catholic Church was bad, and therefore it justified any level of excess because the Catholic Church was evil, and Martin Luther had to fight evil with even greater evil because it's justified because the Catholic Church was evil, and Martin Luther was doing God's work because using even worse, evil, disgusting things than the Catholic Church is doing God's work. Inri says, such a long time ago. How about Jesus? Yes, Raymond, what do you think? Jesus was a long time ago. I think we need to adapt. I think we need to. I think we all need to bend over for the gay movement. I think we need to get used to licking the female penis, because all that New Testament stuff was a long time ago. You need to get with the trans G movement now. You know what I'm saying? These old school dinosaur women with cervixes and wombs, like, that's old school, man. It's old school stuff. That's a long time ago. Get with the modern stuff, right? Yeah. So do you understand where this goes? Right? Do you understand what we're left with if we don't have eternal principles that are based on eternal values that are moral? Do you understand where we are now? This is where this nonsense, which is in large part attributable to Martin Luther breaking and destroying logic with his nominalist nonsense, this is where this has helped to lead us. So this was a weapon in his battle against enemies, human and demonic. So apparently eschatology was an acceptable weapon in general German society. And of course, Martin Luther was a great theologian, the greatest of men. And he was very much immersed in the world because he was better than everyone else and better than the evil Pope. So Luther's thumbing his nose at papal powers was not just a rejection of papal theology, it was a rejection of foreign authority. So it says here that Luther may not have seen himself as rejecting foreign authority, but his insolent vulgarity towards Rome could not help but be a rejection of both the papacy and Rome itself. This bold rejection was made in coarse and graphic language, unpolished, unpapal language that was comfortable and familiar to German-speaking people. And this defined him as a virile and distinctly German male. So Luther puddled poo, Muhammad diddled kid. So how bad must Christ have been? Christ was sinless even by today's standards. It's okay to criticize morality. And yes, thank you, Villainous, correct. So let me see. Yeah, so Luther's World. So, okay, let's skip over this. That's all. You guys can download it. The links are in the description box. You can download this at any time. Maybe I should... It's not in the chat. I don't want to take the time out not to do that. But please, the link to this document is in the description. Okay, you can download it and read it for yourself. So if someone could just grab it and then just paste it into the chat, I can then link it in I can pin it as a pin chat. So the need for a leader who would not falter, who would not walk away, was visceral in times like these. In fact, that was exactly the thing that was needed for, well, if you think about Hitler. They needed a strong leader because Germany was weak, Germany was divided, Germany was fractured. They needed a strong leader, just like Hitler. Okay. So, for Martin Luther to be seen as a leader in this world of uncertainty and danger, Martin Luther needed to appear not only virile, but distinctly German in his virility. In other words, he wasn't supposed to look Christian. He was supposed to look as uncouth and foul as all the other Germans. Right, so now this is the Pope's threat. I'll just zoom out a bit. So this is the Pope. This is a story of the Pope stepping on the neck of a king. This is a symbol of defeat, of conquering. Now, so this is the Pope's threat, 1545. We'll discuss that in a moment. Let's continue. So this was an era of rising nationalism, ripe with opportunity for political protection, without which Martin Luther would have burned exactly as had Jan Hus. So Martin Luther had political protection because he was operating in a political sphere. His actions, his words, everything he did was political. It was used by these princes for political gain. In fact, he made his Christianity, his church, subservient to the politics of the princes. So, of course, you had the church that was independent, or at least it tried to be, not under the control of the state. Martin Luther placed religion under the control of the state. So for the first time, the head of the political sphere became the head of the church. Because Martin Luther said, well, the church has to serve the state. It's a tool of the state. So the church became a secular organ. The church became a secular tool. Popular in this era was the untrue but widely believed story of Pope Alexander III having stepped on the neck of the German hero, Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, 3 centuries before Luther. Luther used this legend more than once as imagery in his resentment of the Pope. So he was willing to use false propaganda to pursue his own political and private aims. So equally strong was German resentment of Italian authority. So now you're looking at, these are very stubborn people. In order for Luther to find refuge from church authorities and their secular adherents, he needed to be useful enough to gain the protection of maverick secular princes. So Martin Luther had to be useful to maverick secular princes who wanted to enrich themselves by destroying the Catholic Church in their region, taking over the lands, and taking the wealth from the church, stealing the lands, stealing the gold, stealing the money. And this, of course, they were successful at because Martin Luther aided and abetted this ability for the princes to destroy the Catholic Church where they were and steal everything from it and become rich in the process. So that was Martin Luther being a tool, quite literally, of the government of the day. Eagle Hawk Panther says, hello from New Zealand, Lloyd. Bless you for all your good work. As a traditional Catholic, we would argue that going by the fruits of your work, yours is more of a vocation. Well, thank you very much. So, yeah, for Luther to be useful to these friendly powers, friendly to Luther because he was useful to them, it was necessary that if they were to throw on his shoulders the mantle of national champion, so that's a political role. Luther was acting in a political role as well as a spiritual champion, so he was making the spiritual subservient to the political agenda of these princes, that those shoulders must not be weak or inadequate to have any legitimacy as a national champion. His secular allies needed Luther to be viewed not only as virile, but as a fitting and distinctly German mold of virility. So in other words, he had to be sexual. He had to be a strong sexual image, just like Muhammad with all his wives. Well, Martin Luther had to shag a nun. Martin Luther had to break his oath, and Martin Luther had to get a nun to break her oath, and he had to destroy the orders. He had to destroy the nuns, the convents. He had to destroy the monasteries. He had to destroy the Catholic orders so that he could then create this destruction of an ancient tradition and a vow made to God. He had to make sure that he violated, just like Muhammad violated all the 10 commandments, Martin Luther had to violate an oath, get a nun to violate an oath, and then shag a nun, because that's how you prove that you're a real man. That's Luther. So this is diaper washer. This is a man washing diapers. And of course, for a man to wash diapers was considered to be sissified back in the day. So let's continue. Rick Filmmaker says, thank you for your courageously reporting the facts and what really happened. Thank you. No, yeah, I'm surprised no one's come after me at all 150 kilograms of manliness. Yeah, all 330 pounds of Martin Luther. Yeah, all 330 pounds. So how did Luther gain such a virile, strong, manly image? Yet this half-starved walking skeleton became the image of a German Hercules. Well, let's find out. The perception of virility. Okay, so this, of course, is Hercules Germanicus. Right, this is Martin Luther being peaceful here, as you can see, with these club murdering these violent, heavily armed monks. Yeah, you can see as Saint Thomas, Aristotle. Yeah, murdering Aristotle, because as you know, Martin Luther was all into Aristotelian logic, which he was not. Martin Luther was an irrational fool. I've discussed this at length already. I will discuss it during the series again. I will repeat that. But William of Ockham, so that is a lie, because Martin Luther was a disciple of William of Ockham. Martin Luther was a nominalist like William of Ockham. He was an irrational idiot like William of Ockham was. And don't forget, while we can say, yes, there was certain genius to people like the philosopher Kant, like Ockham, we always hear about their good parts. They fail to tell us about their evil, shall we say, less than intelligent aspect. Which kind of, it's like, there's a guy called Hitler. He loved his mom. He loved his mom. He loved dogs. He was a vegetarian. He was really, really a sweet man. He was good to his friends. And that's all. And that's all. That's all about Luther. Sorry, that's all about Hitler that you really need to know. And that's exactly the story with Kant and Luther and Ockham and all of these people. So understand, there is propaganda in these messages here. So, the hanged Pope dangled from a rope clenched in Luther's teeth, as you can see here. As Luther slew the enemies of the gospel, because these were all enemies of the gospel. So Luther was commonly portrayed as a saint. In fact, Luther was portrayed as a prophet, right? Luther saw himself as a prophet. I've already discussed this at length. Luther was a prophet. He spoke directly words given to him by God. He spoke the words Jesus gave him right out of his mouth. Right? So this was the image of Luther that he portrayed, and that was portrayed about him. So he could not be wrong, which is why so many churches deviated from Martin Luther's message, because Luther was wrong and they're right, because none of that makes any sense. So yeah, with Martin Luther then, we would still have church and state as one. Germany also separated the two. Well, the state kind of owns the church. They kind of control the church. So yeah, it's yeah. So yeah. Okay, so don't know about that. Druids also carried a staff. Okay, do you know? Yeah, do you know who else carried a staff? Druids. Yeah, that's also true. So, anywho, let's continue. As in this woodcut of Luther as German Hercules and in images of Hutten, Luther was often portrayed as larger than the other figures in the woodcuts. Okay, Luther was viewed as virile, right? He was a champion. So, they deliberately created a robust and manly Luther. What set of princes would rally around the image of a skeletal monk? Because Martin Luther was a little not so well in the head, and Martin Luther would starve himself to death. He would fast himself to the point of, well, starvation. So who would want the skeletal monk? So let's lie. Let's use propaganda to prop up this whole man. And yeah, what princes, what political figures would rally around a skeletal monk? We need a killer, right? So those who wanted Luther to win needed him to be viewed as a dominant male. Luther's enemies did not seem to understand this, for if they had grasped the need for Luther to be perceived as virile, they would have portrayed Luther as weak and effeminate. So this is Luther as a wine sack. So this is Martin Luther portrayed as a wine sack. Martin Luther drank, by some accounts, as much as 2 liters of alcohol a day. So he'd finish 2 liters of wine a day. The man was apparently quite a drunk. This sounds like Gnosticism, starvation, yeah, so let's see. Luther was not portrayed by his enemies as the masculine ideal. He was obese, a lecher, a heretic among heretics. Okay, he was often called a drunkard because apparently he was, right? Now, Luther's immorality was shown here by his having taken a nun as a bride. A nun married to a monk, a damned woman to a damned man, an infamous woman to an infamous man. Let me just go back and zoom in a bit here again. So, so a theologian engaging in such behavior would be seen as hypocritical and going against the teachings of their faith. Right? Religious leaders, like theologians, must embody the values that they preach. In this case, pursuing a nun as a sexual partner goes against the vows of celibacy and chastity. This highlights the importance of holding religious leaders accountable for their actions, as their influence on others has significant consequences. So here's a man who was willing to violate his oath. Here's a man who was willing to violate her oath, and not willing to keep up, shall we say, the standards one would apply to a theologian of his supposed status. So while this was not a positive thing, him shagging a nun, it portrayed Luther as a sexual male, thereby fostering the view of him as masculine, even if negatively masculine, and he was willing to embrace that. So Luther was seen as a liar by his enemies, and as a two-faced trickster who pandered to the masses and did not play by the rules. Well, that describes Muhammad to the T as well. Some of these accusations were well-founded. Luther often did not play by the rules, right? He even published a letter from a rare female adversary. So, okay, now, under the pseudonym William Ross, the Englishman Sir Thomas More wrote, "A certain rascal whose name was Luther, who, because he had outstripped the very devils in impiety, surpassed magpies in his garrulousness, and pimps in his dishonesty, prostitutes in his obscenity, and all buffoons in his buffoonery, so that he might adorn his sect with worthy emblems." In other words, Martin Luther was willing to debase himself and sell his soul so that he could gain the respect of secular leaders and gain power and influence. Artsy Fartsy says, a narcissist believes that any attention is good attention, even bad attention. Yes. Thanks, Cacique. Right. So, what more said of Luther could have been said of any mercenary soldier of the era? So, Martin Luther was no better than the average mercenary, and mercenaries don't always have the highest reputation. Oh, let me take a brief stop here, just so... By the way, just wanted to show you guys a couple of things. I meant to do this earlier, but I'll take a short break here. This is my original bodyguard badge. I had to retrieve this in South Africa. I had to clean out some things and get the storage. So this association is now defunct. It no longer exists. On the back is some notes, and it also has my blood type. I don't know if you will see it. Great. It won't come up, but it's actually got my blood type as well on it, in case I got shot, so that they could tell what blood type. And this was the later I got a replay an update to it. So SABA means South African Bodyguard Association, CPO, Close Protection Officer. Just so you know, out of sheer curiosity. This is a medal I received from my boss. Was given a series of medals. We did some work in Qatar. This is a medal given to us by apparently the Crown Prince at a ceremony my boss went to. So this was a just as a recognition, just something to from Qatar to recognize us for work that we did on the security of the Qatari border. And this is something I'm really proud of. This is 2004. Okay, that's the South African Bodyguard Association pin, but this is my South African Hall of Martial Arts Hall of Fame medal. So that here, this one says South Africa Karate and Martial Arts Hall of Fame. It says character, sincerity, effort, etiquette, and self-control here on the bottom. And then here it says to celebrate the achievement of technical excellence and goods and great service to the South African martial arts sciences, honored by your peers. So yeah, just thought I'd show you guys that. So in case anyone was wondering if I actually do have a clue when it comes to taking care of myself, like I kind of do. So, so yeah. Okay, well, let's continue. So Martin Luther had the basic morals of any sort of sailor or mercenary soldier. Soldiers were rascals, impious, sometimes dishonest, and certainly obscene. Very masculine traits. Now, this is Martin Luther. These are his friends writing about Martin, well, making a woodcut of Martin Luther with 7 heads. The man with 7 heads. Now, this is supposed to be a compliment because he's a doctor. Dr. Martinus Luther. Okay? And Ecclesia, it says here, and then some other things here. So, in other words, he's a man, Martinus Luther, 7 Topf, 7 heads. So, he's supposed to be a man with multiple talents, a man who wears many hats, but yes, the Hydra. Villainous? Well done. I've got some very, very smart people in the audience. I mean, PhDs that listen to me, I am amazed. I thank you. Okay. So, yeah, this is Martin Luther, right? The 7-headed Luther. Now, yeah, the Hydra. So, commissioned for a work by Luther's enemies, Cochleus, this woodcut depicted the faces of Dr. Martin Luther. My bad. Commissioned for a work by Luther's enemy, Cochleus. My bad. This was the many faces of Dr. Martin Luther, all of them maleficent. Okay? Maleficent is an adjective that describes something that is harmful, evil, or malevolent. It can refer to a person who's wicked or who causes harm intentionally, often used to describe characters in fairy tales or fantasy stories who are villains or antagonists. So my apology, I made a mistake there. I thought this was supposed to be a compliment. It's not. This was by his enemies. Note the thick neck, the brawny chest, and the musculature. The last head on the right is that of Barabbas. So that is Barabbas here. Next to the head is a club, right? But this is exactly how Martin Luther's friends depicted him, right? With a club. And, right? And in both the 7-headed and 2-headed versions, so there's a 2-headed version, the club was designed to portray him as a wild man. But the Lutheran side, the Pope too, was portrayed as a wild man. This kind of imagery communicated the threat of backstabbing, duplicitous traitor. Now, we know for a fact that he did backstab. He did betray the peasants, right? And many of them, tens of thousands of them apparently, were killed. And he wrote enthusiastically, go ahead and kill them. God would love you for it. In fact, you will earn heaven for murdering all the peasants that you can. So grab your sword and go out there and murder some peasants, because that's good. So coupled with the clubs, these images implied brute force. And that's not an inaccurate view of Martin Luther. Luther possessed peculiar eyes that were noted by friend and foe alike. Now, this is interesting. When someone asks about the demonic, this is something I've come across a few times that's mentioned about Martin Luther, his eyes. Dark brown, sometimes appearing black. His eyes were rimmed with gold, giving them a bestial appearance. Okay, eyes rimmed with gold. I mean, so let's have a look at that. That's kind of fascinating. Okay, so let's have a look for eyes rimmed with gold. Eyes rimmed with gold. what kind of animal has eyes rimmed with gold? Well, I mean, we typically associate eyes rimmed with gold with vampires, demons, right? This is not, shall we say, generally, normally considered typically human. So let's have a look here. Yeah, eyes rimmed with gold. That's kind of odd, but okay. So that's Martin Luther, animalistic. So he had black eyes. Okay, sometimes eyes that appeared black, rimmed with gold, giving them a bestial appearance. Friends referred to them as being like a raptor's or lion's eyes, while enemies considered them reptilian. Okay, fascinating. Let's have a look at that. Reptilian eyes rimmed with gold. Yeah, reptilian eyes rimmed with gold. So yeah, I mean, take your pick here. Okay. So that's Martin Luther. Thank you very much. Drew Traver, thank you very much. It says, as a Catholic, I think all of the churches will have flaws because of human nature, but some teachings go too far. Yeah, look, humans make mistakes. The church will, obviously, it's a human institution in a real sense. It's, you got people in it, they will make mistakes. But then again, Jesus does claim in the New Testament that the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Now, humans will make errors, but the church obviously needs to be cleansed. The church needs to stick to doctrine. That's why you need tradition, right? Because as long as you cling to tradition, you should be safe. Those traditions are historical, because Christianity is a historical religion. Of course, you have the Protestant movement that tries to completely remove the historical from Christianity and make it into something that's purely of the imagination, which is subjectivity, ultimately relativistic, right? Purely a personal religion. It becomes every man his own church, every man his own pope, as Martin Luther literally wrote. So Dr. Obvious says, I've personally seen the blackness of eyes of people in persons that flashes back to normal color quickly. It suggests inhabitation by the diabolical. Now, there are people that have stated that Martin Luther, there's a question about this guy's eyes, that some felt he was a little strange. And thanks again for the, thanks Drew, thanks again for the donation. Again, even Judas was a disciple. Yeah, of course, humans will make errors. And Judas, of course, did what he did. However, don't forget, Jesus was meant to die. It was his purpose to die. He had to, so he could overcome death. That was also part of the plan. So that sin, that evil, was turned to something good. It doesn't make the evil good. It means that a plan was made to try to follow that path through evil, but ultimately lead it to a good outcome. This doesn't mean that doing evil means doing good. Doesn't mean that God does evil. These decisions were made by people. God knew that people were going to do evil, but this could be used to have a good outcome, to bring salvation in this case. So yeah, but that's not the point of this discussion. His eyes were reputed to be part of his powerful effect on people, whether to signify genius, as his friends believe, or to hypnotize helpless souls, as his enemies believed. Combined with charisma, his physical features impacted the prevailing views of Luther. Now here you've got some killing going on, right? You've got a war going on and some killing, and even a hand chopped off here somewhere. So, large peasant holiday. Was it the holiday? Good grief, I could have that wrong. Sorry, it's this. Okay. So, Luther's unashamed claims of peasant ancestry. So let's say that's a little bit questionable. Luther did not have to identify himself as a peasant, for he was in fact only half peasant. Now look, his father was actually doing really, really well for himself. So Luther tries to claim poverty. So the serpent sociopath stare. Yes, that's a good point, Rick Filmmaker. Okay, so let me see. Okay, so precisely in the middle of the image is a hand that has been cut off in a brawl. So violence, unruliness, drunkenness, and gluttony were the themes and woodcuts of peasants. Sorry, that's how I made the mistake. I thought it was warfare. It was the peasants, but even when peasants are having fun, there'll be violence. And while these were far from positive things, violence, unruliness, and drunkenness were arguably masculine. So Martin Luther was just being masculine. He wasn't doing anything wrong. That was just the normal Christianity of the day. The image of peasantry added not only to the perception of Luther as masculine, but also the perception of Luther as distinctly German. The gulf between smooth Italian culture and robust, earthy, foul-mouthed German culture was, that illustrated the gap, right? So Luther typified a common German man in a time of nationalist pride. I thought he was a great theologian, someone who followed the tenets of the Bible as a great Christian, an exemplar of Jesus. But okay. As a monk, the son of a prosperous man and a burgher mother. His mom came from some let's say his mom was middle class at worst, with a little bit of money behind her. And his father was a prosperous man. So yeah, Martin Luther was poor and a real peasant. Prosperous father that made money, good money, and a mother that came from money, clearly. So understand, there's a lot of this nonsense. Luther could have claimed his maternal family's erudition to fit the Italian church's definition of masculinity, but he chose the rugged peasant. So instead of being sophisticated and aligning himself with the Catholic Church, he said, well, you know what, I'm going to be a real pig today. Adding to this was the belief that Luther's paternal family had a dangerous streak, for his uncle was a violent man and his father was reputed to have committed murder. That's a long-held story that is still prevalent in that region. It is very likely that, according to what I've read, it seems that there's reason to suspect that Martin Luther's father had killed a man, was a murderer, and ran away from where they lived to another place to escape the law. Okay, so this must have endowed Luther with a violent aura. Let's be proud. Martin Luther had a violent aura. That Jesus had a violent aura, as you know. I mean, because that was necessary, because people had to be scared of Jesus. He had to intimidate people. Jesus had to intimidate people. So as we know from the New Testament, and that's why Martin Luther was simply just echoing the presence of Jesus, the personality of Jesus, by having a violent aura, because that was very important for the New Testament. Just like Matthew was known as a violent man, and Mark, and violent guys that were beating people up and getting drunk, and yeah. Two more factors were his temper and his courage. He was very emotional and often flew into rages, and he also became heavily depressed. Now, let me look up something here that might be very interesting to you. Let me bring up something else here. Write this correctly. Okay, let's have a look at this quickly. Let's have a look at R.C. Sproul. Now, this is Mr. R.C. Sproul. All of you know who. Actually, let me just bring R.C. Sproul, just in case anyone doesn't know who he is. This is R.C. Sproul. He is a very famous Calvinist theologian, right? Everyone knows who this man is. Very, very famous Calvinist theologian, admirer of Martin Luther. And he says here, so, we know that Luther was preoccupied with a foreboding sense of his own death, having predicted his own death at least 6 times falsely. We also know that Luther went through several peculiar episodes. Now, Martin Luther would go through depression. He would also go through very violent phases where he would become extremely irrationally angry. And Martin Luther was obsessed with his own death. So I don't know, that's obviously psychologically normal. So he was very emotional. He flew into rages. And this didn't make him look good. A man's inability to contain righteous anger was in fact a sign of his virility. Just like Muhammad, oddly enough. Isn't that just like Muhammad, who would fly into rages, who was a violent man? And this was a sign of his strength that Muslims copy today. That's the example of Muhammad. Martin Luther had the ability to fly into terrible rages. And Cochlus and Luther's other enemies did not see Luther's anger as righteous. This notion of an inability to contain his anger can be added to the factors that contributed to a view of Luther as masculine. Just like Jesus. Just like Jesus. Tell me if I'm wrong. Let me know in the chat if I'm wrong. But this is wow. This is so New Testament. Wow. Okay, let's continue. Coarse language would have gone a long way in cementing the image of Luther as a sturdy German peasant. So yeah. Appearing quite unlike the Roman Church, an appearance that eschatology had an association with peasant heritage would have given him. So he wanted to be exactly, completely, totally unlike the sophisticated, evil, disgusting, completely bad Roman Catholic Church by being foul-mouthed and disgustingly peasant-like, because that's good. So there we have Martin Luther. So let's have a look at eschatology in Luther's world. So guys, I've been going here for 1 hour and 15 minutes. Should I continue? Should I go on further? Just let me know. So this is scatology in Luther's world, and this is a peasant taking a dump right there. Du machst es gar zu grob. Du machst es gar zu grob. Okay, yeah, right here. The text in the banner says, "You really are being too coarse," is a caption of one peasant scolding the other for defecating and vomiting in public. Here he is vomiting, here he is taking his dump. So, yeah. Okay, so keep going. I missed this live stream. Well, you're still here. The stream is still live, Neil D. Sproul looks like Brezhnev. I wonder if Luther met Mr. Squeezy in a cave. That's a good question. That's a very good question. Okay, so ever disclosed where did Judas go after his death? Yeah, who knows? Okay, let us continue then for a little while my voice holds out. So at first glance, based on an image like this, it appears that scatology might have been a liability for Luther, but it turns out no. It was not. Luther's allies used copies of an anti-Luther pamphlet as toilet paper. So Luther's allies, Luther's friends, used copies of an anti-Luther pamphlet as toilet paper and then sent the poop-covered pages to the original writers. So in other words, they did a, that thing kind of similar to the thing that happened to Johnny Depp when his wife took a dump on his bed, which is considered good manners in Hollywood, I'm guessing. But they wiped their asses with pamphlets about Martin Luther and sent the poop-covered pages to the authors because that's the Christian thing to do. It is the Christian thing to do. Martin Luther never complained about any of this stuff. You'll discover there's a lot of things he didn't complain about. He encouraged it. So, enlightened derelicts and their feces. Yes. So, yeah. Fecal matter was a visual part of Martin Luther's world, and it manifested itself verbally in nearly every area of his speech. So, in the winter of 1542, he seems to have suffered one of his many bouts of depression. Hold on. So, calling him a manic depressive, maybe someone who had borderline personality disorder, might not sound so strange after all. He shared with his table guests, I am... okay, yeah, so hold on. Let me make this slightly larger so we can all see this. Martin Luther says to the guests at his table, at his house, I am ripe shit. So is the world a great wide asshole. Eventually we will part. So Martin Luther says that I, Martin Luther, I am ripe shit. The world is a great wide asshole. Eventually we will part. I'm not sure how that quote didn't make it into the book of Matthew or into the book of Acts. I am... It's probably based... Is that a quote that's in Acts 1? Was that... Just someone explain to me if... Because that... This is... Wow. I'm going to start using that now in my next sermon that I give when I become a priest one day. I'm going to use that as a sermon because if Martin Luther said it, it can't be wrong because it's Christian, it's holy. Poopifer, exactly. Yeah, Book of Nonsense, verse 95. Yeah. So Martin Luther is ripe. You got the word already. The world is a great wide a-hole. Yeah, that's... Luther said it. He's poop. The world is an a-hole. Definitely the book of Acts. I'm sure it's in the book of Acts. We need to Google that. Someone needs to Google that. But profound. Me with my little African brain that never got a PhD, I can't compete with people like this. With my small brain. So even German nobility used scatological imagery in attacking one another, as when they displayed one another's coat of arms dipped in excrement. Monks used scatological language and approved of it in Luther. Monks used scatological language and approved of it in Luther. In 1515, one of his filthiest sermons appears to have been instrumental in his election to one of the highest posts in the Reformed Augustinian order, because being able to swear and use poop imagery really makes you a man of God and makes you fit to run an Augustinian order. Yes, that's what I've always felt. 2 hours is great. Please continue this talk when you can. I'm reposting this with a direct link back to you. Thank you very much. This subject matter must be told. Thank you very much, Rick Filmmaker. So look, I'm introducing you to this document which encapsulates a lot of ideas, which tells us there's more to be discovered if we dig. Now again, I can't, of course, repeat an entire book when I go through my Luther series, but this is one aspect of the Luther series that I need to bring attention to, and then I'll continue within the actual slides that I have, but I'll be branching out into various documents discussing Martin Luther's life and legacy and his history with the dark, the very ugly, dirty, filthy, smelly side of Martin Luther's life that is typically just overlooked, right? So yeah, he was a class act, Rick. Luther was a class act, definitely class act. Your definition of PhD definitely fits here, Lloyd. Yeah, PhD, piled high and deep, and Martin Luther piled it really high and really deep. So yeah, so why would these monks, these highly educated men, approve of Luther's filthy language? Because maybe he rotted their brains. Maybe Martin Luther absolutely rotted their brains. So this is illustration for prognostic, Erhard Schön. And in a visual illustration, we have in woodcuts of the Landsknecht soldiery, the examples of two means of killing the Pope. They say very nicely, striking down the Pope. We're going to strike down the Pope now. In other words, you're going to murder the Pope. You're going to kill him. Notice here they're going to beat the crap out of him and kill him. Right? Here, that's a sword. I believe that's not used to pick your nose. That is not used to brush your teeth. That is not used for flossing. That's used to kill people. And you can see he's going to kill. Here they're beating. So in other words, a Landsknecht struck down the Pope with his traditional weapon, the sword. Mercenaries serving in the armies of various princes and nobles, as well as the emperor, Landsknecht soldiers were viewed as a necessary evil. They were dangerous, vulgar, and in many ways above the law, but they were also glorified. So in this image full of apocalyptic symbolism, the Landsknecht defeated as he was expected to defeat. Fine and well, but here let's have a look at some of the imagery associated with Luther. There's more of this. I've collected some of it. I will be discussing this in future. I'll be talking about more of these things, just like the SS. Masihi Shachzod, yes, there's something. Well, don't forget, Martin Luther did inspire the Nazis. Not because the Nazis misread and misinterpreted and abused Martin Luther's words. No, they followed Martin Luther to the letter, did exactly what Martin Luther said, which led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands, even millions, because they followed Luther's advice, because Martin Luther's ideas and the Nazis' ideas kind of overlapped in a very disturbing manner. This is a man taking a poop. Sorry about the imagery, excuse me, but this is Martin Luther taking a poop in the tiara of the Pope. So this is the papal symbol, and this is Martin Luther. So this is Martin Luther approved a lot of this stuff. He knew this was going on. He did not stop it. He encouraged it. I'm concerned for people in Bethel, NAR, and the Charismatic Church. It looks like Sufi and Hindu possession. They defend it like Muslims. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. Yeah, so in this case, I'm going to have to, Drew Trevor, I'm going to have to agree with you. There is something about that is, yeah, something weird, something very Muslim about the apologetics that comes out of some of these Protestant churches. I've made that comment more than once. I've actually upset some people once when I said this is dawah for Protestants. It upset a lot of people when I said that. And to know that this man was a harbinger of Christian goodness, the Reformation. Yeah, this was the Reformation he brought. How to use poop as theology, I guess. So the Pope is adored as an earthly god. Now, okay, so here the Landsknecht mercenaries were depicted depositing their feces into the papal tiara and defeating the Pope with a weapon other than the sword. Scatology as a weapon was associated with men, and therefore Martin Luther was a man. Fecal matter was a weapon. We do not see women bearing their backsides in woodcuts associated with Luther. We see men taking poops. So yeah, so in other words, I mean, think of Jesus, right? How many woodcuts show Jesus as a real man by having pictures of men with their backsides exposed, their pants pulled down, taking, excuse my French, taking a shit. So this is the appropriate way to show that Martin Luther is a man and someone who speaks for God, someone who brings the true, the original, unaltered Christian faith before it was corrupted by the Catholic Church. Martin Luther is bringing the true, original Christian faith by having pictures of men taking a shit represent him and showing just what a man he is. Excuse me, but am I taking crazy pills? Is that remotely Christian? Is that the imagery? I mean, do we, to show reverence to St. Paul, to Peter, to the fathers of the church, to Jesus, do we draw pictures of men taking a shit and saying, this is them showing these people as true men? I'm sorry, is that satanic? Is that off? There is something deeply, deeply off about that. It is disturbing. So Luther changed the way he spoke when men were not in the audience, for we see in letters to women that Luther was far less likely to use fecal imagery, and even when he did so with less strong language. Okay, great. So Luther's language did not meet with unanimous approval outside of Germany. Thomas More, writing under the name of William Ross, referred not so much to Luther's theology as shit, but rather to the manner in which Luther treated his adversaries. So let's see what Thomas More says. He continues to act a buffoon in the same manner as he has begun. He continues to rage, because we know he was manic depressive. He probably had borderline personality disorder. He casts insults. He talks nonsense in his stupidity. He raves in his insanity. And to carry nothing in his mouth other than cesspools, sewers, latrines, shit, and dung. So he continues to carry nothing in his mouth other than cesspools, sewers, latrines, shit, and dung. Thomas More is simply stating what Luther is doing. So if this is what Luther does, then let others do what they will. We will take counsel at that time to consider whether we should treat him as he raves thus according to his own strengths, and paint him in his own colors, or whether we should leave this raving little brother and this idler in the latrines, because Martin Luther spent a lot of time in the toilet. Okay, do understand, this is a fact. Martin Luther spent an inordinate amount of time in the toilet, with his furies and ravings befouling, and himself befouled with his shit and his dung. More was so utterly repulsed at the extent to which he felt forced to use coarse language to respond to Luther that he never publicly owned up to this work, that the commonness of scatology across all layers of society was distinctly German. This was a German phenomenon. Martin Luther left an indelible stink on German culture. Is attested to by the fact that when More felt the necessity to respond to Luther in Luther's own filthy language, he wrote it under a pseudonym, as seen by the monks of Luther's Augustinian monastery receiving a foul sermon so approvingly. So Martin Luther's foul sermon was really appreciated by these monks of Luther's, by the nobility using scatology to demean one another, by the use of Faeces to threaten, and as we shall see later, by the unwillingness of many of Luther's enemies to stoop to his level in verbal and visual combat. So Martin Luther's enemies were not the ones descending to this disgusting, filthy level. Martin Luther was the one that went there. Martin Luther didn't have good arguments to deal with the Catholics. Martin Luther simply insulted them using the most disgustingly foul language and bodily functions because he couldn't obviously provide a decent argument. So he decided to insult them in the most demeaning way possible. And his enemies refused to descend to that level. It appears that there is good evidence to support the theory that scatology was a greater part of Reformation-era German culture than of similar cultures in the same era. Yeah, I wonder if there's a connection to Martin Luther there. Okay? And they speak of the very crude Martin Luther was thus marked as all the more German. Yeah, so language as weaponry. For men, access to power required fitting within a mold of current and local definitions of masculinity. Didn't Jesus say, if everyone around you swears and uses feces, you need to do the same? I'm sure that's, which book of the Bible is that? That would be, is that the one with the whale? Holy moly, hang on. The one with the whale. Jesus says, if your enemies are rude and disgusting and talk about poop all the time, you need to do the same. Jesus says that, right? That's the one, the book with the whale. Let me know in the comments if I have that correct, because I'm sure he says that. So Martin Luther was obviously just following the one with the whale in it. For Luther as a monk, this meant mastery of language. Words were his weapons. Yes. So, scatology associated the target of speech with the devil because fecal matter was associated with the devil. Now hold on, if fecal matter is associated with the devil and Martin Luther was obsessed with fecal matter, poop, an eye for an eye and a poop for a poop. Yes, yes, villainous. So if Martin Luther was associated with fecal matter, then wouldn't Martin Luther then by default be associated with the devil? Aren't we being given a message here? Am I making a false and erroneous conclusion by stating that it's not the Catholics that are associated with fecal matter here? This is Martin Luther. And he is now immersing himself in, let's call it fecal culture, which would mean, according to the symbolism, that he is associated with the devil. Teresa Huston says, not a very high intelligence if all you can talk about is poop. Yeah, was Luther among the first major German theologians to rely on poop talks to make his points, Lloyd? He looks like he sort of originated the genre. You know, he looks like he originated the genre, as far as I can tell. Dr. Obvious says, satanic ritual abuse victims may manifest psychiatric illnesses such as schizophrenia, multiple personalities, and more. Yeah. Rick Filmmaker says, these quotes are facts. Anyone can look them up. Luther was in love with shit, period. So guys, look, we're adults here, okay? We're adults here. This is history, and I'm not in this case trying to use these terms for the sake of shock value and trying to be edgy, but this is a fact. This man was a disgusting pig. I've explained for years that this man is foul, and I am repulsed by him. I've explained this many times, and there are theologians who are lying about Martin Luther, who are misrepresenting, who are reinterpreting, just like Muslims reinterpret Muhammad. This is the most disgusting, ugly, pathetic excuse for a theologian that has ever lived, and he's revered as the founder of the Protestant religion, who rescued religion from the Pope, from the Catholics, and restored the original Christianity. Of course, now there's like 95 million different flavors of Christianity that are incompatible and contradictory, and God knows which one is the right one, because alone knows what's going on anymore within the Protestant church, right? But he brought back the right. Just if someone can explain to you of the 40,000 flavors, which one is the right one, but yeah, I guess that would be asking for too much logic. So, had to take dog to the vet real quick. I'm back. Welcome, Artsy Fartsy. So maybe Luther took puberty blockers to ensure he enjoyed poop jokes his entire life. Yeah, he's definitely at the Adam Sandler minus a million level of humor. I imagine I just missed Luther being foul again. Oh yeah, he was foul. Is there a connection with the desecration of Catholic churches with poop in France in present time? Is this all similar? I mean, this is something I think that was tied to the Reformation, to the French Revolution. And think about it. This is desecration of this. This is the profane. This is the desecration of the sacred. Martin Luther is here indulging in what we would consider satanic and utterly profane. And he's claiming that he speaks for God. He speaks, the word of Jesus are dripping out of his mouth, right? He's a prophet. This is exactly the opposite. And people are going to look at this and go, Lloyd, you're a liar. You're a liar, Lloyd. You're just lying. And then they're like, and that's an argument. That's not an argument. Okay? So the latrine was something of a playground for the devil. Then why in the absolute fuck did Martin Luther spend so much time in the toilet? Obsessing about poop. Excuse me, but this makes me angry. You do not understand how I have to read so much of this crap. Okay? It upsets me to have to read all of this nonsense. So if the latrine is a playground for the devil, which Islam teaches too, by the way, that's a Muslim thing, and Martin Luther was definitely into that nonsense, why was he spending so much time obsessing about the devil's poop? Okay, let's continue. It's demonic. Yes, Roxy. So, I can see why I'm not invited onto Catholic talk shows very often because of maybe the way I speak. Heck, it can't make me very popular to talk about topics like this, and yeah. Okay, so for instance, let's see, the latrine was a playground for the devil. In Luther's discussions of his relationship with the devil, we see how strong this association was. Before Christmas, 1531, he recorded thoughts on a conversation. This is Martin Luther's conversation with the devil. The devil says, "You, monk, on the toilet, you may not read the matins here." Right? You may not read the matins here. And the monk, Luther, says, I am cleansing my bowels and worshipping God Almighty. Let me rephrase that. I am taking a shit and worshipping God. Okay. Someone please tell me if that makes sense. Hi, Satan. This is where I worship God while I take a dump. Now, maybe it's legit. Heck, I don't know. Someone tell me, but maybe when you read the church fathers, when you read the New Testament, does St. Paul talk about, you know what, Jesus spoke to me while I was taking a shit? I'm sorry about the language here, but think about that. Run that through your mind for a moment. Imagine St. Augustine. Imagine St. Thomas Aquinas. I was communing with God while fill in the blank there. Think about that. Do we see this anywhere else? But this man is the hero of the Reformation, the man who brought truth and justice and greatness and holiness back into the church, who defended the truth of Christianity against the corrupt. What the fuck is that? Sorry, but that is insanity. This is disgusting. And this is the man who created the Protestant religion that millions of people follow today. This, man, it makes me angry. So anyway, let me finish this. The devil says, you monk on the latrine, you may not read the matins here. Monk, I am cleaning my bowels and worshipping God Almighty. You deserve what descends and God what ascends. So Satan deserves the thing that descends, which is the poop, and God what ascends. Well, we know the smell ascends. So is he saying, am I reading this right, that God deserves the stink? Or is the toilet the appropriate place to do worship? I've checked the church fathers, and I haven't found any of them sort of like do their prayers in the toilet. I find that they tend to go to church and they pray in front, stuff like that. Just regular, normal, everyday things that don't hurt my brain. But this hurts my brain. So for Luther, God was ubiquitous and could be worshipped anywhere. Yeah, I think we've now established a whole new standard in theology, a very low, very smelly standard. But this is the founder of the Protestant Reformation. Neil D says, this is a weird conversation between Satan and Luther. So understand, look, for me, this is therapy. Talking about this, having read all of this stuff, having a bunch of things that I still need to talk about. I've got a pile of material to go through. It makes me angry. And this is like my therapy, to just get it out of my head and say, look, people, this is real. The guy actually said this stuff. To even mention, Kyrie eleison says, to even mention worshipping the king of the universe while dropping a deuce is just disgusting. I second that. So Eric Braun says, fecal substitutional atonement. Yeah. What ascends? The hell he's talking about? Yeah, exactly, Mr. Rock. So yeah, guys, yeah. Can't say it's a common thing to do, says Just Janice. Yeah. So Neil D says, instead of using the biblical rebuke, he says, hey, I'm going to chase you away with my poop, with my very, very effective Christian pooping, I guess. So let's see, Bro Lloyd. This Ismail McDuffie. What's the true understanding as I was raised a Baptist? I want to learn more to be able to help my family. Look, to be honest, just start reading the Church Fathers. Maybe read St. Irenaeus. Maybe start with that, St. Irenaeus on Against Heresies. Just read a nicely modernized translation of St. Irenaeus Against All Heresies. That might be interesting. You're going to find a great number of Protestant parallels in St. Irenaeus's Against the Heresies. So Rick says, Luther can no longer hide. So let's continue. Let me see if I can finish this. Let me see how far I can go. Because the Lucifer's thing finishes, okay, 43. I've got 13 more slides. Let me see if I can go further. Okay, so let me continue here. So God was ubiquitous and could be worshipped anywhere, even on the toilet, especially on the toilet. In fact, Martin Luther had major theological inspiration on the toilet. Sola fide came to him while he was taking a poop. Okay, so in Luther's thinking, his adversary, the devil, threw every argument at Luther to keep him from enjoying salvation and trusting in God, associating the devil with the latrine and with all things fecal. Luther quipped back to the devil that God deserved Luther's praise, or maybe Luther meant God deserved Luther's stink from his poop. I don't know, I could be wrong. Luther often had yelling matches at night with the devil. So Luther would have loud shouting matches with Satan while he was taking a dump at night. These battles were more vehement before he had the revelation about justification by faith and not works. So Martin Luther calmed down after one day while taking a satisfying dump. He created the doctrine of sola fide. It hit him like a thunder clap. In the English-speaking world, this revelation is known as the experience in the tower. But Luther made a point of saying that it happened in the latrine in the tower. So you see, that's okay. Let's go to Logos here. Let's go to this. Okay, this is the Logos Bible software, number 3232C, description of Luther's tower experience between June 9 and June 21, 1532. The words righteous and righteousness of God struck my conscience like lightning. When I heard them, I was exceedingly terrified. If God is righteous, I thought, he must punish. But when by God's grace I pondered in the toilet and the heated room of this building over the words, he who through faith is righteous shall live, Romans 1:17, and the righteousness of God, Romans 3:21, I soon came to the conclusion that if we as righteous men ought to live from faith, and if the righteousness of God contribute to the salvation of all men who believe, then salvation won't be our merit, but God's mercy. My spirit was cheered. It's by the righteousness of God that we're justified and saved through Christ. Through these words, which had before terrified me, now became more pleasing to me. The Holy Spirit unveiled the scriptures for me in this toilet. The Holy Spirit unveiled the scriptures for me in the toilet. Pandering Panda, welcome. Thank you for joining. Thank you for becoming a subscriber. So yes. So that's Martin Luther. This is Luther's Works, volume 54, page 193. So someone once told me, well, your Martin Luther books are not worth as much as the genuine experience of the Holy Spirit we have, because that's book learning. So yeah, that's what an actual Protestant told me about this stuff. But then again, I had a Catholic tell me the same thing about the catechism. So whatever. So this is where the meaning comes from. Holy poop. Yes. Sola fide was of the same truth value as it is today, as it is third day. Dr. Jonathan Gemmell says, at this point, I wouldn't be surprised if you use the scripture as toilet paper. That's why Deuterocanon is missing from Protestant. Don't do that. I'm gonna choke. Oh my God. I can't laugh. I'm gonna choke. Dr. Jonathan Gemmell says, at this point, I wouldn't be surprised if you use the scripture as toilet paper. That's why the Deuterocanon is missing from Protestant. You won the internet today. Yeah, that would explain the gap. So yeah, guys, that. Okay, so let me continue. Yeah. So Neil D says this is beyond blasphemy. Look, understand. This is upsetting. This is very upsetting. How is this Christian? How is this holy? How is this sacred? It's just so. So Luther had yelling matches with the devil at night. Okay, and of course, after his revelation on the toilet, he felt a little better. So this is the experience in the toilet. So don't be fooled by the experience in the tower. They're just trying to whitewash it. Okay. So see, Martin Luther knew that he was not just, and he knew because of his inability to control his temper, his inability to control his moods, his mood swings, of his infantile behavior, of his disgusting mannerisms. He knew that he was a bad person, and therefore he had to go, you know what? All I got to do is just say the magic words, and I don't have to do anything holy. I don't have to do anything Christian. I just say, hey, God, I believe in you. Save me. And I'm going to keep on doing these disgusting things that I've always been doing. And I'm good. Okay. Do you understand the problem here? Martin Luther this is lazy theology for people who don't want to do anything good, who don't want to change. So God, I'm a pig. I'm going to stay a pig. I'm going to keep doing pig-like things because, what the heck? But yeah, I'm going to say I believe in you. And so that's it. Just salvation. There you go. That's sola fide. That's Martin Luther's theology right there. Brakir says, thank you very much for that donation. I just picture Beavis and Butthead chuckling uncontrollably at all this while watching a documentary about Protestantism. Yeah, I mean, yeah. So, toiletology. Yes, 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 I like that. Toiletology. Toiletology. Let's actually bring that one up. Yeah, so let me just fix it. Oh my god, typo. Toiletology. This is not theology. This is toiletology. I'd have to agree with you there. I'm just picturing Luther like Bill from the King of the Hill. I can't guess so. So did he get his revelations when he was in the toilet? Does that look like Momo received his own revelations? Yeah, whatever. I mean, seriously. Yeah, okay. But look, the man was a great theologian, so we need to. So I've already looked at that. Number 4007, another account of the Tower experience. Actually, let me see if I can bring this up. If this is anything different, let me see if this is a different reference, or do I have it here already? Let me go here. There's a couple of references to this in Luther's works, but they mention the story. But the thing is, understand they changed the idea of toilet to tower. So let's go here, and here again they mention, yeah. So that expression, righteousness of God, was like a thunderbolt in my heart. When under the papacy I read, in my righteousness deliver me, Psalm 31:1, and in thy truth I thought that at once this righteousness was an avenging anger, namely the wrath of God. I hated Paul with all my heart when I read that the righteousness of God is revealed in the gospel. So Martin Luther writes, I hated Paul with all my heart when I read that the righteousness of God is revealed in the gospel. Romans 1:16-17. So only afterwards, when I saw the words that follow, namely that it's written that the righteous shall live through faith. Now, we can tell that Martin Luther was righteous, right? This is a righteous man, and he had faith, and that's all he needed, because he was righteous, and he didn't need to be saved because he was so righteous, but he needed faith so that he could be saved because he was righteous. Okay, and in addition, consulted Augustine, was I cheered when I learned that the righteousness of God is his mercy, and that he makes us righteous through it. A remedy was offered to me in my affliction. His affliction in this case would be constipation. Seriously, people are winning the internet today. People are winning the internet today. Solar feces. Okay, typo there, but solar feces. That's exactly what we had through poop alone. So yeah. So there you go. I hated Paul with all my heart because yeah, reasons. So let us continue with our discussion. Here I felt, okay, so, and it hit him in the latrine, okay? Latrine, you guys might have seen that movie with Val Kilmer, Latrine, okay? Le Chocolat Mousse, and Latrine, well, this is comedy for sure, comedy gold. And it hit him in the latrine that by faith you are justified. So this is toilet theology. He said late in his life, as he looked back on this revelation, here I felt that I was altogether born again. I was born again while taking a dump on the toilet. Okay, fine, whatever you say, Luther. And I had entered paradise itself through open gates. So let me rephrase this. Again, please excuse my language. I was taking a shit, and I had a revelation that I was born again, and I entered through paradise's gates. Does that kind of sound sacred? Does that sound like Christian to you? Because man, I'm having problems processing that. Luther made the point of this revelation having reached him in the latrine, because this was where the devil was believed to loiter. So here's my question. How do you know it wasn't Satan talking to you, Mr. Luther? Dr. Martinus Luther, how do you know that wasn't the inspiration of Satan whispering in your ear or up your ass or whatever was happening? So this made the revelation doubly powerful, for God had not only released him from the theology of works. So Satan said to him, you don't have to do anything good. Just believe in God. Just have that thing going on in your imagination. Just tell yourself stuff that you want to hear, and you're good to go, because laziness. But God had done so in the very place where the devil ruled. So Martin Luther was sitting in the place where the devil ruled, and he received great inspiration that went against 1,500 years of Christian tradition. where the devil ruled. So yeah, any thoughts on that as an audience? So God would go anywhere to reach his children. In his many battles with the devil, Luther's defensive volleys were often scatological, and he said, "But I resist the devil, and it is often with a fart that I chase him away." Obviously, Monty Python took this idea and said, "I fart in your general direction." So yeah. I mean, that's how exorcisms work. So remember, guys, you learned it here first, and you learned it from Martin Luther via me, that if Satan is tempting you, just sort of fart a lot, just fart to get rid of Satan, because that's what the church should have taught. I don't know, Luther beat them to it. So yeah, guys, this is the real Christianity. So when he tempts me with silly sins, I say, "Devil, yesterday I broke wind too. Have you written it down on your list?" When the devil planted guilt over silly sins, he could be run off with a little flatulence that weakened his power and reduced the devil to a comic level. Because as you know, when you fart, you turn the devil into you make him powerless, because farts make is that in the New Testament book with the whale? Is that in the one with the whale where it says, Jesus said, if you fart, you will make Satan powerless? I'm pretty sure. Is that in Acts? I'm just help me out here. My Christianity is being recalibrated here, and I'm having problems. Luther frequently used nothing more than flatus, farts, to drive the devil away. Don't need prayer. Don't invoke the name of Jesus. Don't do any of that prayer or sacred or holy stuff. Just fart, because as you know, farting is the one church tried and approved method of getting rid of temptation and Satan. Winning. That's why the movie The Exorcist had it completely wrong. The priest should have eaten a lot of beans. The priest's assistant should have eaten more beans, and they would have solved that problem with that demon like that. Problem solved. Beans. So beans are called the musical fruit for a reason, and Martin Luther had discovered the secret of beans. Almost every night when I wake up, the devil is there and wants to dispute with me. I've come to this conclusion. I instantly chase him away with a fart. So yeah, guys, this is Drew. Again, thank you very much. You see, they fart on one another. It's what they do. Yeah. Thank you very much for that donation. I really appreciate it. So Kush XD says, this might be a cult. I heard that lots of occultists believe that mocking their demons will weaken them. Luther contribution to theology is the innovative use of poop and farts. A villainous says, I wonder if he lit his farts during sermons. So guys, this is the original Christianity. Remember, the Catholic Church had gone astray. They'd gone evil. They were pagan. And which I saw today on Twitter. You know, the Catholic Church is paganism all over again. The Catholic Church is divorced from Christianity in every way possible. It has nothing to do whatsoever with Jesus. But what we're reading here, this is Jesus turned up to 11. So yeah, Martin Luther took the devil seriously. Okay, let's see how seriously he took the devil. He says, Dear devil, I have shat in my pants and my breeches. Hang them on your neck and wipe your mouth with them. Now, I don't know if this is just so much sort of symbolic, or if he actually shat in his pants. But I'm hoping it's symbolic, because these are brain-stabbing images that are hurting my mind. So while the devil in this case could not be driven away with mere farts, the effect was the same, weakening of his power. So guys, my advice to you, learn from Martin Luther. If farts don't drive away Satan, shit in your pants. This is what we've learned now from Martin Luther. Okay? So if the fart doesn't chase Satan away, shit in your pants. This is the greatest theology ever written by man. This is incredible. This is incredible. Is this in the New Testament book with the whale? Because I'm sure it's in the one with the whale. So Brakir says, beans, the most sacred of food. They literally give you the power. Okay, hold on. Let me just... It says here, beans, the most sacred of food. They literally give you the power to exorcise the devil. Maybe your spouse and in-laws as well. Nothing but oh man, you guys are gonna kill me today. Seriously, you guys are gonna kill me. This is so yeah, guys. So often Luther grew angry at the devil. Okay, Luther was willing to use every weapon at his disposal. He often grew angry at the devil, and he used language as a weapon against the devil. Have you not had enough, you devil? So have I also shat and pissed. Wipe your mouth on that and take yourself a full bite. So, while this stronger language illustrated how very seriously Luther took the devil, because man, if you read the Catholic Catechism, they don't use this kind of. The Catholic Church just doesn't have a clue. I mean, Jesus didn't have a clue. Remember, Jesus was tempted for 40 days and 40 nights, and what did Jesus do? He took a dump on a rock and farted, and Satan went away. And the temptation only lasted 10 minutes. Sorry, no, I got that story wrong. If Jesus had done that, following Martin Luther's example, problem solved. He wouldn't have to be tempted for 40 days and nights. Could have been over in a minute. So yeah, I don't know. Martin Luther here is one step ahead of Jesus. He knows better. So yeah, guys, please excuse my my sarcasm here, but this is disgusting. Do you understand the implications of this? This is the kind of stupid implication that you can derive from this, because stuff this disgusting. This gets worse, yes. So just because we all grew out of primary school doesn't mean we can take a trip down memory poop joke. Yes, Dr. Obvious. Yeah, it doesn't mean we can't take a trip down there. So yeah, maybe Luther invented the saying, eat shit and die. So yeah, I think Luther's filthy talk probably had the opposite effect of what he wanted. Berliner says, I wonder if Luther poked bloated whales on beaches to show how Jonah got thrown up on the beach. Yeah. So yeah, guys. So look, this discussion of shitting in his pants shows how strongly Luther took the devil, because nothing shows. So look, clearly babies take Luther very strongly because they poop in their diapers all the time. So look, don't be angry with babies pooping in diapers. It's not that is actually babies doing exorcisms. They are keeping the area around you holy. They are driving away demons, and same logic as Martin Luther's using here. So this language illustrated how seriously Luther took the devil, and it also gave the hearer an image of the devil or some such creature shamed or shocked into submission by the force of Luther's anger and vulgarity. Actually, no, Satan was actually laughing here and clapping because he had driven Luther into this kind of filth. Okay, this is Satan applauding, happy, because he had turned Martin Luther, this great Christian theologian, into a disgusting, foul pig. Yes, conociendo al Islam, he was as crazy as Momo was. So look, I mean, yeah, can you understand how upsetting this is to read this stuff? So ultimately, what Luther did to the devil, he did to all his enemies. When Luther's logic did not persuade, and the man had poopy logic, okay? Let's just say, let's be polite, Martin Luther had very poopy logic. He chased them away with unanswerable diminishment. He insulted them in the worst way. It didn't matter what one said to Luther in return, for what response was there to name-calling and vulgar accusations? This degradation, this sweeping away of any real chance for academic debate, made Luther the victor in the eyes of his followers and allies. So in other words, the early Protestants, who were better than the Catholics, because the Catholics, don't forget, the Catholics are pagans, have nothing to do with Jesus, the Catholics are evil, they couldn't respond to these Protestants who saw Luther as winning by using the most disgusting, foul, poop-based shouting and screaming and insults as winning, because who needs logic when you can just use poopy language at people, because that's how you win theological debates. For them, this vulgar degradation gave the perception of power to the degrader, which would be Luther. So Luther was powerful, and so where Luther degraded his enemies, be they spiritual or earthly, he gained the perception of power. So, in other words, the early Protestants viewed vile, disgusting, coarse language as powerful, winning. So while Luther did not create the following woodcuts, many of them appeared in his writings and in the writings of the Lutheran camp. Because these are the good guys, don't forget, these are the good guys. They therefore represented Luther. Certainly, the language Luther used also reinforced these images. So here you've got two men dropping their pants, exposing their buttocks, and farting at the Pope. So, the Papal Belvedere. In this Lutheran woodcut, the top line reads, "The Pope speaks." Okay? The Pope speaks. As these peasants bare their buttocks and release farts in answer to the Pope's decree, we see reinforced Luther's frequent comments about the Pope, to whom he often referred as Pope Fart Ass, amongst other things. Near the end of his life, Luther wrote a foul piece entitled "Against the Papacy in Rome, Founded by the Devil." So, convinced by this time that the Pope was Antichrist, Luther attacked him as follows. Now, this whole idea of Rome being Babylon, this whole idea of the Pope being the Antichrist, the Pope being evil, this came from Jan Hus. So this idea was one that Luther absorbed, and Luther actually, he entrenched the idea. But the idea originates from the Protestant side with Jan Hus. So convinced by this time that the Pope was Antichrist, Luther attacked him as follows. "But what does the Pope say? Come here, Satan. And if you had more worlds than this, I would accept them all, and not only worship you, but also lick your behind." So yeah, the Pope would lick Satan's behind. Disgusted with papal power over blah, blah, blah. So he says here, the crude-ass Pope, okay? Why do they tolerate such things from a rotten paunch, crude-ass Pope and fart-ass in Rome? And similarly, the indulgence is an utter shitting. Yeah, that's holy language that you learn at theological seminary. So basically, Luther is showing us the proper application of correct theological language that you learn at a Lutheran seminary. So Neil D says, "This is so bad. I kind of feel sorry for Luther being so mentally disturbed." The guy was fucking crazy, clearly. So the Pope could be the Antichrist for refusing to fight the Ottomans when the time was right, but Luther urged Austria to surrender to Islam for paying their sins. Yeah, I know. So yeah. Artsy Fartsy says, he's not a prophet, he's a court jester. So Luther believed the truth comes out in the end. Ricky. Yes, he did. This is just absolute filth, this Kyrie eleison. I cannot believe this stuff was even recorded for us to read. It's like the hadiths of Muhammad. It's like the hadiths of Muhammad. It's disgusting. It's disgusting. The picture it paints of Martin Luther is just filthy. Okay? So Luther warned the Pope not to make missteps, okay? And he says gently, "Dear Pauli," right? That's Pope Paul VI. "Dear donkey, oh dearest little ass Pope, you dearest little donkey." The reason I've got donkey in green is that, as you know, Muslims traditionally, historically, belittle their enemies by calling them donkeys. For some reason, Martin Luther would often use the same term that Muslims love to use. Conociendo al-Islam says he spoke like Momo did. Yes, exactly. You picked up on it as well. This is the way Momo spoke. If a fart should escape you while you were falling, the whole world would laugh and say, "Oh, the devil, how the ass Pope has befouled himself." But it was okay when Martin Luther befouled himself, because that's just holy and godly and gets rid of Satan, because hypocrite. So let me see. So Luther added in quotation marks the rebuttals he expected the Pope's supporters would offer. So here Martin Luther writes what he thinks his enemies would have written in response. "Silence, you heretic. What comes out of our mouth must be kept." Listen to what we say, in other words. "I hear it. Which mouth do you mean? The one from which the farts come?" Yes, that's very so smart, Luther. That's like a 5-year-old. You can keep that yourself. Or the one into which the good Corsican wine flows. Let a dog shit into that. So yeah, that's Martin Luther at his 6-year-old best. So yeah. So this farting ass in Rome, what else can he do? He farts out of his stinking belly. So it's bad when the Pope does it, but when Martin Luther does it, it's actually just holy exorcism. It's Martin Luther purging the devil and bringing sacred peace back to the area, because this is getting rid of Satan. But when the Pope farts, it's bad. When Martin Luther does it, it's holy shit. Quite literally, because Martin Luther's shit obviously did not stink. Real trauma. Yes, Ariel, a real trauma. So yes, look, again, we're adults here. But what am I to make of this? What do we think of this? Okay, so let's continue. Late in the document, Luther toyed with the Pope. Okay? "I was frightened and thought I was dreaming. It was such a thunderclap. Such a great horrid fart did the papal ass let go here. He pressed with a great might to let out such a thunderous fart, it's a wonder that it did not tear his whole and belly apart." So scatology had been a part of Luther's speech from his young days as a monk. Great monk. Fantastic monk. Superb monk example. There was no answer to such mockery. There was no argument in it, except that the Pope's arguments were nothing but flatulence and feces. I don't know how this woman can conclude that this is Martin Luther using great intelligence, erudition, and an incredible command of language. Rebuttals. Cheryl Cope, another good one. Oh my golly. Uh, that was brilliant. Rebuttals. Yes, rebuttals. Yeah. So, one human making fun of any human farting is like Luther never grew up. Yes, Neil. Adolf Hitler had a serious flatulence problem too. That's a fact. That's interesting. We have a source for that. I'd love to know. Lots of interesting new words. This man was completely depraved. Yes, Rick Bass. Completely depraved. And still the Pope gave Luther 60 days to recant after all he said. Yes, yes. Luther sounds like he holds the attributes of body dysmorphia. Yeah, the guy was just crazy. So, oh, Roseanne says, okay, great. So, okay, let's continue. So, Kyrie eleison. So, okay, let me see. Yeah, guys, so let's continue. Rebuttals. Yes, I said so. Okay, so to his adversaries, this must have been seen as childish, and as Luther retreating behind a wall of offal so foul that no one would bother to come close enough to fight back. To Martin Luther's followers, however, especially those less interested in theology than in German independence, political independence, make a note, this kind of argument must have been music to the ears. So yeah, so Protestants really just preferred the sound of farting to actual theology. So welcome to the founding of the Protestant religion. Founded in the toilet. In a sense, quite literally. So let's have a look here. This is a demon, a she-demon, farting out, taking a dump and farting out the Pope and the Pope's friends. Here's the Pope suckling at the breast of Medusa, of a Medusa-like demon. So this is the Pope being tended as a baby by a demon, and this is the Pope and all of his followers being shat out of a demon's butt. So yeah, yeah, Luther did analyze this theology way too much. So the birth and origin of the Pope, 1545. This fecal association of the Pope with the devil was taken to extreme. Not only were his arguments nothing more than flatulence and feces, but the Pope himself was fecal matter. The Pope in this image has been born out of a she-devil's rectum, and received his nourishment and care from another demon. That what the Pope consumed came from the body of a she-devil implied that what was inside him was demonic, and that he was born rectally rendered the Pope living excrement. And there was no possible answer to this. How could one respond? The only response available to such arguments was to fight fire with fire, but the Catholic side either did not understand the power of such imagery to shape the opinions of people in the strata of German society, or the Catholics refused to pander at this level. Now here's the thing, Martin Luther was seen as a hero. His followers, his fellow Protestants, saw this as righteous, as justified, as heroic, as Christian. Don't forget, as correct. Now, I don't think any of you here who are watching this would view this as Christian, but these supposed founders of the Reformation, these fathers of the Reformation, viewed this as holy, as righteous, as Christian. And this is demonic. And so this is what the Protestant Reformation or Protestant Revolution was founded upon. This disgusting nonsense. All I can say is Luther seems pretty crappy. Yes, Brakir. So guys, let me stop here. This only goes on for a few more pages, but I'd rather just give it a miss for the rest. It only goes on for a few more pages, but it's a lot. So it's like 10 more pages. So let me stop here. N75 says, these are not fathers. They're fakes. And I fully agree with you there. This is the kind of imagery, this is the kind of thinking that existed in their minds. This is what was part of their psyche. This is part of their soul. This is part of their language. This is how they expressed themselves. This is what they thought was righteous and Christian. This is anything but. This is disgusting. And this is the foundation of the Reformation. So, in the words of Thomas More, no buffoon was ever found who exceeded him. So stolid a bearer of blows that he will thrust filth into his own mouth, which he spits out into another's bosom. Martin Luther will thrust filth into his own mouth, which he spits out into another's bosom. So N75 says this is what Jesus and Paul warned us about. So Roxy says Protestants don't understand. It's a new religion like Islam and Mormonism. Yes. So yeah. Neil D says, imagine the cope they had to go through to hide all this from Reformation textbooks. Yes, yes, and yes. That's why I'm talking about it. That's why I've upset various people, and I have a few less friends on YouTube these days because of me discussing these issues. Polo Down says, this is comedic gold. So guys, I will call it a night here. I'll continue another night, probably on Wednesday. So what is today? Monday. So Wednesday, tomorrow, no. So guys, yeah, I hope you've learned something useful. Please share this. Tell people about it. Share it with others. Please do share the link to the channel and help to grow the channel so that people can get the facts. These are unpleasant facts, but these are facts nonetheless. This is the truth that we need to know so we can make decisions, so we can learn. So Rick Filmmaker says, sorry, it's amazing to me that Luther's teachings got any traction. He took advantage of the uneducated. Yeah. Rick Bass says this man did not understand that it is not what goes into a man that defiles him, however what comes out of him. Yes, and that's exactly what St. Paul teaches. Remember, he did say he hated St. Paul, right? You read that. He said that. Now you can say, well, later when he changed his mind, but I hated Paul with all my heart when I read that the righteousness of God is revealed in the gospel. That's why he had to change the gospel of Paul and add the word alone, and suddenly get rid of works and then speak only about faith, right? Because otherwise he hated Paul. Did they teach you that in Sunday school, that Martin Luther hated St. Paul? Because St. Paul set a standard that Martin Luther couldn't reach? No, they didn't. So there. Not the biggest fan of Christian bashing myself, but then Martin Luther is idolized for it. So there's that. I'm not Christian bashing. This is the truth. I mean, I've had too many Protestants tell me, you are causing division. Well, this is the truth. How can the truth cause division? But it divides the truth from the lie. So you've been fed a lie for many decades, for centuries. So that's that. Yeah. Farsi says, it was equally intriguing and disgusting. Yes, thank you. Tom Gyokai, yeah, thank you very much. I will continue to do this, hopefully. So yeah, guys, thank you very much. And yeah, so guys, thank you very much. Yeah, Martin Luther already took care of the dividing of the church. So guys, thank you very much. Have a great evening further. Please tell people about this. Spread the truth. And yeah, I will be in touch with everyone. See you all soon. God bless.